As a former refugee, I know too well the struggles that this status, this label, entails. I want to talk about the refugee crisis and suggest some potential solutions. But before I get to that part, can I share with you my story? I came to the UK 17 years ago at the age of 10 with my mother, who was pregnant with my wee sister at that time. We sought asylum in London, and a year later, we were told we were going to be dispersed elsewhere in the UK. So I thought, that's fine, 5 minutes from London, 10 minutes from London, shouldn't be a problem, But of course, that wasn't the case. So one day, a huge coach came with lots of different families in this coach. And I felt like we did a tour of the UK that day because families were being dropped off in different cities, but we were not getting off. And I thought, where are we going? I was 11 at that age. So my mom said, look, go and speak to the driver. Maybe they made a mistake. Ask, where are we getting off? So I did that. I went to the driver and I said, excuse me, sir, is my family on your list? He said, yes, you're on the list, but you're last. And I said, why are we last? And he said, it's because you're going to Glasgow. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And he said, Glasgow. And I was like, yes, I heard you. Where's Glasgow? And he's like, it's in Scotland. And I was like, where's Scotland? So I never heard of Scotland, let alone Glasgow. So I went back down and sat next to my mom. I said, Mom, have you heard of Scotland? No. Have you heard of Glasgow? No. Great. Don't know where we're going. Fantastic. But actually, looking back now, it's the best decision that has happened to me and my family. Glasgow is very dear to me for many reasons, and one of them I will share with you in a moment. A few years later, in 2004, we received our leave to remain, which meant that we were recognized as refugees. So an asylum seeker is somebody who's seeking sanctuary and safety, right? They're fleeing their country because of the fear of war and persecution due to race, religion, political views, so on and so forth. So while you're waiting for your asylum claim to be processed by the Home Office, asylum seekers are not allowed to work, they cannot go to university, and recently I found out they're not allowed to get married either. So in 2004, when we received our status, I felt really happy because I thought, it's great, I can go to school. I was going to school already, but I can go to uni after school and so on. But I remember thinking my friends who are also still asylum seekers don't know if they can stay here or not. So then that's when we were recognized by the government as refugees. Now there seems to be like a confusion going on between who's an asylum seeker, who's a refugee, and who's a migrant. I explained what an asylum seeker is, what a refugee is. A migrant is somebody who chooses to leave their country of origin for better employment opportunities, right? So they're very different things. Now, there are almost 60 million refugees in the world. Over half are children. And some of those children are unaccompanied minors. So I want to ask you guys right now, how many refugees do you think the UK has taken? Put your hand up if you think it's over 2%. Okay. Put your hand up if you think it's less than 1%. Okay. Put your hand up if you think it's around 5%. Okay, thank you. The UK houses 1% of the world's refugees. In fact, 86% of the world's refugees are hosted by developing countries. Countries like Turkey are hosting 2.5 million refugees. Other countries include Pakistan, Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt. Now, I said earlier, Glasgow is very precious to me, right? So when I was 15 years old, a year after we got our leave to remain, which meant we had that piece of paper to say that we can stay in this country, one of my school friends, Agnesa, a Roma gypsy from Kosovo, who had been living in Glasgow for 5 years at that time, was dawn raided and detained. She was 15. On a Sunday morning, 14 Home Office officials wearing bulletproof vests and helmets knocked Agnesa's flat and went in, handcuffed her father in front of Agnes and her 2 younger brothers, put them in 2 vans and drove them to a detention center in England and locked them up like criminals for 3 weeks. Now, Agnes and her family did nothing wrong. Nobody chooses to be an asylum seeker. Nobody chooses to be a refugee. So when that happened, I was absolutely outraged. And believe it or not, I was a very shy girl at school. Clearly still shy. And when that happened, I went to my school teacher, who was a bilingual teacher at that time, total legend, by the way. And I said to him, I was like, Mr. Garvin, I don't understand why Agnes and her family have been treated like this. They've done nothing wrong. They didn't want to leave their home. They left because they're desperate to survive. And especially for Agnes and her younger brothers. So before I knew it, 5 other girls joined me, and we became known in the media as the Glasgow Girls. We campaigned, and we started a petition in school. Almost everybody signed it. We then presented it to our local politician, who then invited us to the Scottish Parliament. And during the time we were campaigning, Agnes's lawyer gathered up the evidence from the United Nations and submitted that to the Home Office to say, actually, if you deport this family, they are going to be persecuted. So then that decision was overturned. Agnes is living in Glasgow. She's got her leave to remain, and she's really happy. So we're successful in her case, but we lost as well. We lost so many families, unfortunately, were deported to unsafe countries. And I should say that the UK is the only country in Europe that has indefinite detention. So if a criminal commits a crime, they know how long their sentence is. If an asylum seeker seeking protection, running from war and persecution, comes to the UK and their case is rejected, they could be detained indefinitely. And the other issue is destitution. So destitute asylum seekers basically are people whose asylum claim has been rejected, but the government recognizes that they cannot be deported because their country of origin is not safe enough, but at the same time they won't give them leave to remain. So they're made destitute. So they're out in the street without a home and without any resources, basically, no benefits and so on. So fast forward a couple of years, and I continued campaigning. And before the picture of the little boy, Aylan Kurdi, was published, me and Pinar Aksu and Margaret Woods from Glasgow Campaign to Welcome Refugees decided that we would go to Greece to help refugees arriving by boat because we knew that the situation was getting worse. I mean, the refugee crisis has been going on for a long, long time, not just since the picture was published. So we decided we'd raise a little bit of money and help people out there. And we thought maybe maximum we would raise about, £500? But when the picture was published, we raised almost £10,000. It was overwhelming. I mean, we had one mother emailing us saying her 2 daughters, one was 9 and one was 7, had sold their toys to raise money for refugees. Now that's what Glasgow represents for me. It's humanity, it's justice, it's fairness. It's seeing people as people rather than labels. So we went to Greece, we went to Athens first, and we went to a place called Victoria Square. And it was basically a square in the middle of the city, and lots of families were sleeping on the floor. We saw lots of children. And one thing I will always remember is a little girl who basically took a sweet from a lovely Greek woman who was distributing it to families. And she came to me and Pinar, and she asked us, would you like to share my sweets with me? She must have been only 5. Now that girl had nothing. She didn't know what was going to happen to her tomorrow. She was sleeping on the floor with her family, but she had humanity to share the little thing that she had left. We looked at each other and just burst into tears, and that we will never forget. We heard from the volunteers that for the families to use the toilets, they had to pay €2 each. We then went to Lesbos, which is the island where a lot of the refugees arriving from Greece. And we met a lovely man called Eric Kempson, and he was telling us about how many people are arriving every single day, and all we could see were life jackets. But for me, all I could see were lives. And it was heartbreaking, it was absolutely heartbreaking. And he asked us if we wanted to help refugees off the boats the following day. So we did. We went along and we saw families arriving by the boats. And this mother from Afghanistan gave me her child to check if her little baby was still alive, because they were soaking wet. And a volunteer who was a doctor came running to help, because there were no NGOs when we were there. And he looked at me and he saw how distressed we all were, and he said to me, look, Amal, all we can do is smile and say welcome. because we have no power in this, you know. I will always remember that. And then we came back and tried to raise as much awareness as possible. And then last year I also went to Calais in France. We went to the jungle before it was demolished. And again, we saw lots of unaccompanied minors. And I always think back and think, I wonder what's happened to them. I wonder what's happened to little Ahlam and her family, you know? What's their future? It is a horrible situation. I mean, we're experiencing the worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. But as I said earlier, I would like to suggest some potential solutions. I hope that we can have a fair and humane asylum system and to end detention and destitution. The United Nations Refugee Agency has alternatives to detention. For example, keeping families in the community instead of locking them up like criminals. Allowing safe routes to sanctuary and safety. Allowing people to reunite. Allowing those young unaccompanied minors to reunite with their families. And world leaders also need to put saving lives first. Nobody should drown crossing a border. Yet almost 7,000 people have drowned. Governments need to stop blaming refugees and migrants for economic and social problems. And they need to stop racism and discrimination and legitimizing it. I mean, I can't believe in 2017 there's a refugee ban by Donald Trump. It's absolutely shocking. Like, where is humanity? But I'm a hopeful person. And I have a very, if you didn't already get it, I have a strong belief in humanity. And I know that there's hope out there, and we can make a difference. So I want to end with a message of hope. Instead of building walls, let's build homes. Instead of spending billions on weapons and war, let's spend it on the homeless and the needy. Instead of spreading hate, let's spread love, because love knows no borders. Thank you very much.